It gives me indeed a great pleasure of giving you a few thoughts about the idea of cultural diplomacy seen by somebody who has been in public office on a local level, the city of Antwerp, for more than 14 years and 10 years as vice mayor of the city of Antwerp. So that's exactly what I'm going to do and take you through this adventure. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, Lorenzo de' Medici and Nicola Machiavelli used it. Louis XIV, Richelieu, and Mazarin used it. Queen Maria Theresia and Metternich used it. Elizabeth I and Walsingham used it. It is indeed what we've been talking about for the last days about cultural diplomacy. These missions, these people that I just mentioned, were entrusted with the value of diplomatic missions to local and other European courts. These missions required great diplomacy and a sophisticated understanding of what politics is about. All kinds of art were often used as a kind of diplomacy to expose power and to start the conversation. The Dutch, ladies and gentlemen, used culture as a diplomacy only a few weeks ago when they put President Obama in front of the Night Watch, Rembrandt's most famous painting and icon of the Netherlands. But you and I, we do not need Bob Dylan to understand that times are constantly changing. New times require new strategies, and these times are evolving in a speed no one ever has seen before in the history of mankind. I will give you 3 insights from my experience as I see this role of cultural diplomacy evolving. First of all, I would like to make a statement about the importance of culture and how often it is still an unexplored source of diplomatic power. And I think I will come close to what the previous speaker, His Excellency, has been saying. And there I will give you a set of good practices from my own experience in the city of Antwerp. Secondly, I would like to talk about the shift from vertical to horizontal cultural diplomacy. And the third point that I would like to make is about the new role of diplomats and how new kinds of diplomats enter a new level playing field. In all these cases, it will become clear that I do not regard cultural diplomacy as a profession, but rather as a state of mind, more as an entrepreneurial attitude. So let me start by emphasizing on the importance of culture. Heinrich Heine's famous quote of 1823 was, "Where they have burned books, they will ultimately end in burning people," unquote. That, ladies and gentlemen, should not be forgotten. It is one quote that says exactly how important culture is. Culture is key for what, in my opinion, turns people in what we are. It's what makes us human beings. And the city is a collection of human beings. So culture defines a city. In my city, the city of Antwerp, has played a tremendous role in that for the past 600-700 years. It was the city where the stock market was invented, where the polyphonist Orlando di Lasso worked, where Thomas More situated his Utopia, where the Tinsdale Bible was printed, and where painters like Matthijs, Bruegel and Van Dyck and our printers were controlling the image industry already in the 16th century. I'll come to that later. Today, Antwerp is the city of world-renowned artists as Luc Tuymans or Jan Fabre, and as you know, it is a world diamond city, and it has the 2nd largest port in Europe. I'm saying all of this just to say one more thing. In my city, you have 172 different nationalities. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no city in Africa which has that number of different nationalities. Together with Amsterdam and New York, this is the top 3 in the world. It's a very tiny, small city, 500,000 inhabitants, but 172 different nationalities. And that is the part where visitors come in, exchanging culture and views, a variety of languages, curiosity, religions. Ladies and gentlemen, they all belong to the DNA of the city. Now, how can one ever draw the attention of international guests, of companies, businessmen, tourists, investors, students, academics, families, if we would not be able to say who we are? How on earth establishing relationships by not using culture is the main question. And I must say that in those many years, I have spoken to diplomats and ambassadors from all over the world who, I'm sorry to say, didn't know much about culture, neither their own, let's say, the culture of the country where they were stationed. How is that possible today in the 21st century? How can a diplomat be trained without acquiring any cultural knowledge and skills? What really worries me, ladies and gentlemen, is that during diplomatic days, and I think it exists all over the world, where ambassadors are asked to come back to the capital of their country and where they are informed and have debates for a couple of days together, let's be honest, you don't hear a lot of questions about culture at those diplomatic days. All topics most of the time deal with international topics, international conflicts, international economy, financial markets. Nobody asks for a possible strategy dealing with culture. Yet culture is what we are, what distinguishes us from others. In my opinion, culture is the window in which we see the world. And without understanding and appreciating each other's culture, the windows will be closed and fear will rule the world. And let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, local conflicts always, and I'm firm in that, always have a cultural dimension as well. Movie houses were closed and music was banned under the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. And extremists only recently tried to destroy the holy shrines in Mali's cultural capital, Timbuktu. It's always about culture. Look at what's happening at the Krim at this moment. It's about culture. It's not about the assets. It's not about the financial market. It's about who we are. Are we more European? Are we more Russian? Are we religious? Are we non-religious? Are we Christian? Are we Muslim? It always goes back to exactly what we are. And it's about culture. It's about identity. So using culture as a diplomatic tool is exactly what I've been trying to do on a very, very low and small scale for more than a decade now in the city of Antwerp. We established a partnership with Singapore by bringing to them a prestigious exhibitions like the Story of the Image, and we did the same with the city of Shanghai, a twinning city of Antwerp. Drawing attention, creating awareness, establishing contacts, building partnerships, and finally attracting investors and visitors, that is how it works. We created strong ties with New York by working together with Ellis Island for our brand new Red Star Line museum about migration. And we used our Belgian-born fashion icon, Diane von Furstenberg, as our ambassador in Manhattan. We were helped by all the former US ambassadors, former ambassadors of the United States to Brussels, to Belgium. And when the Royal Ballet of Flanders goes dancing at Lincoln Center in New York, or when the main leading theater company in this country, the Toneelhuis in the northern part of Belgium, in the Flemish-speaking part of Belgium, they're present every year at the Cours d'Honneur in Avignon. And almost recently, and I'm very proud to say it, and if you read the newspapers of today, it's all over, I came back yesterday from Rome after negotiating for a year and a half for an exhibition which we are opening later this year in September about holy places and holy books. And for the first time ever, we bring together the three world religions in one exhibition: Muslims, Jews, and Christians. And there were three major objects I wanted to have. I wanted to have some keys of the Kaaba in Mecca, in Antwerp. They never left until now, they've never left the Topkapi Museum in Istanbul. I wanted to have a piece of the Dead Sea Scrolls from Jerusalem, which are so important for the Jewish culture. They never left Jerusalem since they were placed in the bunker of the museum. And I wanted to have a painting of Caravaggio in Italy, in the St. Agostino Church, which was painted by Caravaggio for that specific spot. That painting, ladies and gentlemen, did not leave Italy in the last 237 years. I'm so proud today that because of the help of diplomats and persons from all over, those 3 objects will be present in the museum in Antwerp later in September. So it is all about connecting people, and connections are the start of relationships. Relationships are the cornerstone of any kind of investment, whether it is economically or politically. Unnecessary to say that this kind of networking is going in all directions and not any longer in one vertical peer-to-peer direction. The new way people communicate and network with each other nowadays entails a new kind of cultural diplomacy. And this brings me to my second point. My first one was about the importance of culture. My second is the shift from vertical to horizontal cultural diplomacy. In the game of power, efficiency will become the best legitimacy. A new evolution affecting cultural diplomacy is what I call the horizontalism, which is fast replacing the old-fashioned vertical approach. The horizontal approach is triggering an entire set of new strategies. Perhaps the best starting point to prove the trend is the European cultural diplomacy arena. In 2006, UNIC was created as the network of European Union National Institutes for Culture, UNIC. UNIC has at this moment 32 members from 27 countries and concentrates organizations with offices and programs in more than 150 countries. They build up partnerships by forming clusters of the institutes operating in a country regardless, and this is important, regardless the cultural field they are involved in. The more diversity, I would say, the better. This is not about a chaotic diversity, but rather about organizations with a complementary field of expertise. As an example, some Baltic states clusters are specialized in wood architecture and restoration, while, for instance, some Mediterranean clusters may be specialized in stone heritage and so on. Anyway, UNIC is expanding horizontally in the EU, and this horizontalism is well recognized, recommended, and encouraged by the EU programs. The reason that I cherish this example of UNIC in the European administration and that I embrace this new, broader definition of culture is because it reflects perfectly what we have been doing also the last 10 years in Antwerp. It might surprise you, ladies and gentlemen, but new cultural diplomacy is actually going back to old cultural diplomacy, to times when the expression cultural diplomacy didn't exist yet and people were not yet confined to their job description. They were not locked up in rules and functions yet. They were not limited to their departments, competence profiles, or vertical careers. Diplomacy in those days was an art and an attitude, not a specialization you could learn at school. I speak of the times before the Industrial Revolution, before the factories and the romantic ideas that arose to escape reality. This old horizontal model is making a comeback. For instance, in my city, in Antwerp, since I was elected as deputy mayor 10 years ago, I have been trying to make people understand in Antwerp that economy and arts, culture and finance are no counterparts but complements of the same ambition. As Charles Landry and Richard Florida and others launched the term cultural industry, this idea already existed in previous times, long before the romantic idea of the poor, suffering artist à la Van Gogh became popular. I am referring to the 16th century, the golden age of Antwerp. I'm referring to those times when Antwerp was the Manhattan or the Hong Kong of the Baroque age. I'm referring to those times when industrial printing was made to perfection in Antwerp. You can still visit the Plantin Museum. Plantin was, if I may say, what Steve Jobs is today. He was controlling the word and image production of the then known world. Kings and queens, Erasmus of Rotterdam, Albrecht Dürer, Sir Thomas More, Lucas van Leyden strolled around in the city, seeking contacts and connections. It was the age of Van Dyck and Rubens, and both were cultural diplomats par excellence. If you ever need an example of a cultural ambassador and you want to make a statement going back for 500 years, then you definitely want to look up the life of Rubens. Rubens was a diplomat and got assignments of King Philip II to create, ladies and gentlemen, peace between Spain and the Spanish Low Countries and England. He is, in my opinion, a classical example of what I would call somebody with an horizontal diplomatical career. He painted for Maria de Medici, Queen of France, the Gonzagas in Mantua, the English king, the King of Spain, and many, many, many others. Like a kind of, let's say James Bond, avant la lettre, he drove in a carriage through Holland with closed curtains, afraid of being caught by the Protestant Dutch as being a spy for the Catholics. He had already the reputation of being one of the greatest artists of his time, if not of all times. And one of the most important things, and it is something which I always like to say in this country, in Belgium, where we sometimes make political life miserable because of the fact, ladies and gentlemen, and it is still going on today, there are large political representatives in this country that are not possible of talking with each other because they don't speak the same language. Rubens in his days spoke 7 languages. I can assure you, to learn French, for me as somebody who lives in the northern part, is not difficult. And to learn Flemish or Dutch for somebody who lives in the south, it's not difficult. And to learn English is not difficult. And to learn Chinese is not difficult. If you want to learn something from somebody, if you want to understand somebody, that's what you should do. I'm not getting elected tomorrow. I'm not participating in the elections. But let me say one thing. I would find it great that before you would be able to get elected, you would have to pass a test to understand that your colleagues who will be speaking there, that you might understand them. It would make life easier. It's exactly what Rubens did in those days. He learned Spanish, he learned Italian, he learned German, he learned French without computers, Google and Wikipedia. Can you imagine that? Ladies and gentlemen, if I'm talking about Rubens, there's one book I would like to emphasize for you. It's a tremendous book. It reads almost, I was going to say better than a Dan Brown, I must see what I'm saying, but it's a tremendous book. It's by the author Mark Lamster. Mark Lamster is a journalist of the Dallas Morning News. He's a professor, he's a writer, he wrote a lot for the New York Times, and he wrote a book about Rubens with the title Master of Shadows, The Secret Diplomatic Career of the Painter Peter Paul Rubens. So Peter Paul Rubens by Mark Lamster, Mark with a K, and the book is titled Master of Shadows. Ladies and gentlemen, cultural diplomacy never ends. 400 years later, Peter Paul Rubens is still, for me, a great cultural diplomat. I cannot talk as a representative of my city in the world about my city without referring to Peter Paul Rubens, just as the ambassador did about the great nation of South Africa. Go to the Prado in Madrid, the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, Le Palais de Luxembourg in France, or Banqueting Hall in London, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And that is the future of cultural diplomacy. Horizontalism implies that we all have to become a bit more Rubens, I would say. The future does not belong to the one-trick pony that excels in its own specialization. We need more than ever people who can help us in keeping the overview. We need you, connect us. I always refuse to be confined in my vertical role as merely being responsible for cultural, tourism, economy, and some other things. I traveled around the world using our cultural assets as a touristic and economic trumpet card. And on the other hand, we learn our people of the cultural and economic department to think broader, to think internationally, to join forces and to cluster our assets. This horizontal approach, this cross-selling of our destination is the key, in my opinion, of sustainable partnerships, not only for my country, but for the whole of my city as well. It is, of course, not confined to civil servants. It is a collaboration of private industry, artists, and all kinds of players abroad. And they all share one common way of thinking, and that is that you should not only create goodwill for your work and, as a consequence, for the place where you live and that you represent. No, it's not that one way of communicating anymore. Our roles are now horizontalized. Our roles is enlarged. And what we all should do is learning people in their own place to think outside in, to have empathy for what's happening abroad, to filter the right information about the right places, places that can link to yours. That thinking outside in is different than what we used to do, thinking from inside out. That is the DNA of a modern cultural diplomacy. That attitude cannot be spread out over a city, a region, or a nation by people who are diplomats as a profession only. Of course, I agree with His Excellency. We need our diplomats more than ever. But it's not longer a responsibility of only the diplomats, as he mentioned before. It's also about people to people, as the ambassador said. On the contrary, it should be an attitude of all those who have the opportunity to cross borders, both geographically and intellectually. And this brings me seamless to my last and third point. I see a new role for diplomats, and I see a new kind of diplomats entering a new level playing field. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, cultural diplomacy is more than ever an attitude, not a profession. That is my point. Why? Because international relations, including the circulation of ideas, are being heavily influenced and affected by the impact of new technologies and the emergence of a powerful new civil society. Non-civil servants are assuming roles that previously belonged to the authorities. We travel more than ever. We built a network of super-fast trains in Europe. 5.5 hours from Antwerp, and you can have coffee in the south of France. You probably enjoy a lunch outside. You take a train at 6 in south of France, and you're back home here in Brussels before midnight. But it goes fast if we want to go from one place to another. But most of all, we travel more than ever with our minds. In particular, new technology as Skype, Twitter, Facebook, I'm on it, you're on it, so let's get connected. Instagram, Pinterest, website, Tumblr, YouTube, LinkedIn has made it possible to have a global reach and to contact individual and other organizations. NGOs, cultural organizations, academics, transnational companies, think tanks and urban projects are increasing their autonomy and have started to define new rules, acting more effectively than the authorities. And there's a word for that. I'd like to describe that as civil empowerment. They have a say now on most of the global issues affecting civil society. So in the international relations, a new kind of diplomatic attitude should be developed. This attitude should be opposed to propaganda. I'm not talking about propaganda. It's something completely different. It should be a two-way communication process that includes both efforts to project an image of your city, our nation, but equally to value other cities, countries, and peoples as well. Diplomats, ladies and gentlemen, become information brokers, trying to understand the values and images of other culture. And information brokers become diplomats, trying to understand that the role they play requires great responsibility. I'm speaking about exchange and mutuality. cultural diplomacy is in 2014 not anymore about soliciting admiration or sympathy. It is no longer showcasing cultural achievements. Diplomacy will be an attitude of thinking, planning, and acting with imagination. And so there are new game players in the field of diplomacy. Of course, there is the diplomats, but let me say just a few diplomats, not official diplomats, in this field from my country for the last, let's say, 2-3 months. There's a tremendous famous music festival, Tomorrowland. There's a lot to do about Tomorrowland in Boom, between Antwerp and Brussels. They're expanding, and it's one of the best export products at the moment because they're going all over the world. They organize a dance festival with more than 80,000 people, and it seems to be something the whole world wants. If we are nominated for an Oscar with a Belgian movie, that is, in my opinion, a new level playing player. If we are going to win, of course, the World Cup in Brazil, the world will know about my country, Belgium. And the rise of a new Silicon Valley star, Dries Bruytaert, creator of Drupal, the reputation of the fashion icons, the so-called Antwerp Six, all of them are new players in what I call new cultural diplomacy. Ladies and gentlemen, if you see what a non-official diplomatic player can do, let me give you another example. Google with their Street View. Does anybody ever think about what they realized? If the ambassador would have to sit around the table with his colleagues asking if it would be allowed to have a camera from South Africa in the streets of other capitals around the world, he would take, in my opinion, more than 20 years to start negotiating in where to put the camera, who would put the camera there, who can see the images, who will filter it, when will they be put on the internet, etc., etc. It would not be possible, not because of our ambassador here, but because it would not be thinkable that you could find an agreement about that. Imagine we would sit together with Mr. Putin and say, you know, Mr. Putin, we're going to put some cameras in Moscow to see what's happening on the street, and we have a very good news. You can put one in Brussels as well. He would not reply. What at that moment diplomats couldn't achieve, all of a sudden, Google Street View has done. Ladies and gentlemen, do you need any other example of in what kind of times we are living today? In 1933, the British diplomat Harold Nicolson wrote that among his colleagues, and I'm going to quote him, "It would have been regarded as an act of unthinkable vulgarity to appeal to the common people upon any issue of international policy," unquote. The British diplomat was talking about a term with a more restrictive meaning at the time. Even in 1933, cultural propaganda or cultural diplomacy did exist under various forms, but those actions were not labeled as public. Unnecessary to say that these times will not come back. In 2014, the importance of those so-called common people gradually increased because of their increased decision power and the growth of uncontrollable information sources available to all of them. Look at what's happening at the moment in Turkey. What happens if the government decides that people are no longer having access to the internet, to Twitter, or to Facebook? It creates a revolution. Ladies and gentlemen, cultural diplomacy is all about trust, and trust is what the world needs. So, and I end with this, I want to give you an example of a man that we had the funeral of yesterday. It was somebody I had the honor of working with when I started my political career. I worked closely with the former Prime Minister Jean-Luc Dehaene, who passed away last week and who was buried yesterday. Jean-Luc Dehaene was a man of not too many words, but he was a man with a great vision. Everybody agrees on that. He's very known and very well respected in the whole of Europe. He was able to lead Belgium into the Eurozone in difficult times. But one of his tricks was his silence. Very famous in Belgium is is his standard response to journalists in times of political crisis when he said, "No comment." This silence, this way of being discreet, was highly esteemed by his friends and political opponents, and so he could gain trust. In one of his last interviews, not longer than a month ago, he said, and I quote Mr. De Hane, "These are other times and require other capabilities." And now it comes. Trust will be built up in public. Trust will be built up in public. This strategy of Jean-Luc belonged to the old vertical times, and he knew that very well. Trust will be built up in public and by the public nowadays. He knew that new roles and new definitions require new players. Trust will be built up in public could have been the title of my speech today, because more than ever, listening will become part of our cultural relations, and listening offline and listening online, reflecting a genuine interest in the other's perspective and demonstrating that different viewpoints are taken seriously and that other perspectives are given consideration. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, cultural diplomacy is a particular kind of entrepreneurial behavior, and like entrepreneurship, it is an attitude and a state of mind. I started this keynote with the name of Niccolo Machiavelli, and I will finish with him by referring to what he wrote. Entrepreneurs are simply those who understand that there is a little difference between obstacle and opportunity and are able to turn both in their advantage, unquote. I am very hopeful about the future of cultural diplomacies because I can only see opportunities there. Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to try to answer your question. I don't know if it will be satisfied for you, but I think it's a very clear answer. I can only see one thing. First of all, we're living in completely new times. I mean, all the pieces of the puzzle that were on the table in times of colonialism are off the table at the moment. If you look to Africa, Africa today is one grown-up, one beautiful continent playing a tremendous important role in the world. Africa has completely changed, and they did it themselves. They changed and they have their own identity, their own culture. They are a booming economical market in the next years. It will be very hard for Europe to keep the pace if you see to the opportunities with a massive group of countries which you have in Africa. So first of all, I am not afraid, and I think honestly people are too smart today, fortunate enough in Africa, to be afraid and to look like any intervention or any approach, whether it is from Europe or whether it is from other regions in the world, might be a kind of neo-colonial approach. I don't believe that. So first of all, I think they know themselves what they want. Secondly, we should see each other on this level playing field, which I was focusing on, as counterparts. We are there together equally. And we have interests in Africa, and Africa has interests in Europe. And we will work together on a very same level playing field. So the exchange of culture is the thing, in my opinion, which we need now. Because there's still a lot we don't know about Africa. Because even if the international mentality and the puzzle, let me put it that way, has changed, let's be honest, there's still not that many people that had the opportunity from Europe to go to Africa. And then I'm not talking about a tourist trip. I'm really talking of feeling the spirit, feeling the heartbeat, talking to people, and to be in that tremendous continent. And even in that continent, you have so many differences from north to south and east to west, as like you have in Europe, or like you have in the United States, or like you have in Asia. So I think the moment today of exchange of cultural diplomacy is more than ever important, because before you start dealing with somebody, before you start selling something to somebody, before you go and ask somebody to help you with something, you need to understand yourself. And so to open doors and to open those windows, as I referred to, is important. So I strongly believe in the honesty of good cultural diplomacy between, for instance, Africa and Europe. And I think at the end it will benefit both of us. Today, if we listen to music, there's a great influence from Africa. If you look to the movie industry, Africa plays a tremendous role. And still there are other issues, cultural issues, where we need to help Africa. There's things going on in Africa about equality of people which really appalls me. How can today in some African countries people are fighting against people because they're gay, knowing that for same political ideas, black people have been discriminated for so long? How is it possible? Well, I think culture could be exactly the key to open a lot of doors. So instead of saying we close the door and we don't want to get rid and don't want to know anything of them, we need to be there to help them. It's going to take time, but it's absolutely necessary. So my answer to your question, I do not think we would have the same conditions as were there during colonial times. I think we're talking with two grown-up continents in the world who know exactly what they need, and I'm a big and very passionate about the fact that we need more cultural diplomacy exchange to know more of each other. It's only when you understand each other that there can be trust, and it's exactly trust that we need to move forward. Well, I think, honestly, His Excellency the Ambassador is perhaps more the person to answer the question, but I can only say that my door is open, and I think that it does not start from above, you know what I mean? It has to start from, it has to grow. One of the best well-known writers at the moment in the Flemish part of Belgium, Tom Lanois, which won a lot of international prizes already, who lives in Antwerp. He lives in South Africa. He lives 6 months, 7 months a year, Your Excellency, in South Africa. And he writes a lot about the mutual exchange and the importance, and what he's been doing on his, as a writer, Tom Lanois has been inviting journalists and people and other writers to come and go to see South Africa and to experience it in another way than just the classical touristical trips which you organize. So I think if one wants to work together, please contact me. And I think I'm not just talking about Antwerp, Belgium, and I'm still talking, I'm one of the few politicians nowadays that still speaks about Belgium. But I strongly believe in this country. I believe in the unity of this country. And I believe that which message would we send if we all would, you know, go back to imagine that there would be an Africa with 79 different countries. Imagine we would go back to a Europe with 125 different little countries. Imagine the United States of America, where California would be independent and Florida would be independent. It's not that, in my opinion, what people want. There might be a lot of misunderstanding why they act and say and feel and vote and whatever. But it comes to knowing each other. The better you know each other, the less problems. If I go to the Belgian coast, everybody speaks French. And it's the western part of Flanders. And when I go to the south of Belgium, I always say, to Luxembourg, with New Year, 95% of the people I meet there, when I go to butcher or a baker, they speak Dutch because they love to go to the south of Belgium to have New Year there. It's the same which takes place in a small country with two large continents with a large distance. So what should we do? There should be more cooperation between Europe and Africa. And then I come back to my point which I made. It would be, and I would ask the ambassador to help us with that as well, as I did with our own ambassadors in the past. We should try to create awareness about it and make sure that the new diplomats, you who might become new ambassadors, consul generals, that during everything what they teach you, you should also be taught about the importance of culture. It's not like learn this encyclopedia and then you know, and do some name dropping and you know, we can get on. No, try to understand what culture is about. How can you use culture in a positive way? It might help you in finding solutions for international conflicts, but it might also help you in opening hearts of people. Now, what is more important than have somebody listening to you or feeling emotional when they see a painting, when they go and listen to a concert? That's what you want to do. If I speak as an ambassador at the United Nations, there might be a lot of people in the room, but nobody in the world might understand what I'm saying. But if you organize a concert with 25 American very top artists singing for Africa, that is something the whole world has heard. And in the same point, it goes about the same matter. An ambassador asking to help Africa on a certain moment many years ago, or 25 culturally people, singers who do the same. Those 25 reached more hearts in this part of the world than the ambassador who's been making a tremendous important point at the Security Council.